Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another one of Mr. Lang's vlogs. Today we're taking a look at the second half of the Civil War. Where we ended off in the first part, which again, if you haven't seen it yet, definitely see part one first. It's going to make way more sense. As we're going to begin where we left off last time with the Gettysburg Address, which is one of the most incredible, oh my gosh, it's incredible, speeches of all time, which we're going to go over right now. So, again, you probably heard at least that first line, right? 7 years ago. Again, what does that even mean? 4 score. That's madness, right? Sounds crazy. The big thing when it comes to that is it's actually a measurement of time. So again, this was said in 1863. Now, 4 score is 20 years. If you have 4 scores of 20 years apiece, that's 20 times 4. So I'll let you do the math. 20 times 4. You got it. It's 80. So now add the 7 years as well on that, 87. Now we're going to do a little bit of math here. 1863 minus 87. Carry the 1776. Something happened in 1776. Does anyone know the answer? Does anyone know the answer? Yeah. You got it, exactly. The nation was born. These United States. Oh, great job. Gold star. So, again, as we take a look at this speech, the first line alone tells you what he's talking about, which is, of course, 7 years ago. Now, I want to give you a little bit of background before we get into the actual speech itself, because it is so beautiful. I've actually got to say this speech in the exact spot, somewhat, because Lincoln was on a platform, that Lincoln said those words as well. I said it, and yeah, it was incredible. It was a moment. It was a moment for sure. So on November 19th, 1863, we had 15,000 people gathered to Gettysburg to honor the Union soldiers. And, really because the war was still going on, it really was a Union. Although I think Lincoln really was honoring all soldiers, as he never really saw the Confederacy as a separate country. Although on the books, they definitely were a separate country. He definitely saw it as a lost brethren we need to bring back. So he's honoring those soldiers that were there just 4 months before. Now Lincoln delivers this 2-minute speech, known as the Gettysburg Address, and reminds people that the Civil War is being fought to preserve a country that upheld the principles of freedom, equality, and self-government. And he does a fantastic job on that. He really does. What he does, the person who spoke before him spoke for an hour and a half, and I bet you people were nodding out, just like, he said so much in 2 minutes, it's unreal. So the Gettysburg Address has become one of the most beloved and most quoted speeches in English language. Expresses grief at the terrible cost of war, and really the importance of preserving the Union, bringing back our lost brethren from the South. Lincoln was technically sick during the address, and when he finished the address, again in pure Lincoln humor, which his humor was amazing. Oh my goodness, I've talked about it before in class, but I love his humor. It's so dry. He literally turned to his advisor and said, "That fell on him like a wet blanket," which is incredible. It really is. So what is this amazing speech I keep hyping up? What does it say? Well, I'm going to say it again to you. Don't worry. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. And we met on a great battlefield of that war. And that, from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they gave that last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Now, you are actually going to be reading the whole Gettysburg Address from beginning to end. I took out kind of the main parts there. But it's beautiful what he says. It really is. It captures what this war was all about, unfortunately. All right. So as we move forward with that, in an incredible speech, the 54th Regiment. Oh my goodness. Again, the stars of the movie Glory. Again, these guys are incredible. This is a very famous black regiment out of Massachusetts that does go ahead and valiantly fight at Fort Wagner, South Carolina, on July 18th, 1863. The bravery of these men showed so much, as of course this is one of our, not the first, but again, definitely the most famous and one of the first all African-American regiments. So after the Emancipation Proclamation, which we're going to get into a little bit later in this as well, African-Americans began to join the Union Army. Again, initially they were only used for manual labor, and that was a big concern, that they were only going to be used for manual labor. However, they're eventually going to see live combat. And when African-Americans see live combat, it is here. Now, there are going to be other black regiments that follow after this, but this is definitely the most famous by far. The 54th Massachusetts, led by Robert Gould Shaw, that are going to lead the attack on Fort Wagner. It was pretty amazing. It really is what those men did. And there's William Carney and Robert Gould Shaw. All right, so how are the conditions during the Civil War for soldiers? Oh, God, they were bad. They were so bad. Again, this war was fought entirely on U.S. ground. So, again, that is what's going to be destroyed, is, of course, U.S. property. There's going to be a lack of provisions on both sides. Again, very, very much so on both sides. What are they not going to have? They're not going to have shoes. They're not going to have coats. They're not going to have some of the basic essentials that they're going to need during this war. And, of course, some are going to desert. Just see you later. Leave. But thousands are going to die because of sickness and disease. And it's really sad to think that the surgeries that occur during this time, there really isn't much in the way of, how it was, done. Let's put it that way. As, of course, if you had the Minet ball or the mini ball, the bullet that came out of the rifle would pierce and splinter your bone, and I mean splinter. Again, you can Google it if you want to see what it does to the bone. It is crazy. I won't show it here, though. It is crazy to think just how much medical attention has come since then. As of course, if that happened, you could possibly get gangrene, which is an infection, and that could spread throughout your body, and you could die. So what would they do? Before gangrene happened, they would chop off the limb on which it was you may have been shot. So it could be your arm, your leg, what have you. A lot of amputees during this war. And again, when I don't exaggerate when I say that we had men that were on the doctors on the operating table, doing multiple people at a time, just, sawing through them with a saw, not cleaning anything because they really didn't know too much about that at the time. And of course, they would go ahead and put you out with whatever they could. Sometimes you didn't have anything. You'd bite down on a leather strap, or bite the bullet, as they would say, literally. Or you could, they may have some sort of chloroform to put you out, which again, too much could kill you. Or they would say, just get really drunk and good luck. It was very horrible how this happened, but this is how, the surgeries happened during the war. I'd love to show you the clip, but again, copyright, so I can't. So moving on, speaking of all these surgeries, again, those doctors were nothing without the nurses. And women are going to serve a major role in war for the first time here in America. Catholic nuns especially, are going to serve on both sides as nurses. Probably the most famous nurse is Clara Barton. Oh my goodness, she's incredible. Who was at Antietam during this. She's also from the great state of Massachusetts, just saying, that's right. And of course, what she's going to be is she's going to minister to the wounded on the battlefield. But her claim to fame is that she is the founder of the Red Cross organization. Yes, that Red Cross that helps out so many people during disasters. That is what she founded after this war. It's pretty incredible. It really is. She's an incredible lady. She really is. She's amazing. And she's from Massachusetts. She's incredible. All right, so I can't show you this, which is about Clara Barton, but kind of summed it up there. So during this war on both sides, the Confederates are going to pass what they call a conscription or a draft. This is the first draft in American history. Again, conscription literally means just that, draft, which is a mandatory service in the army or what have you. So essentially, you can't say no. If the government says you're going to fight, and you're going to go fight, there's no way. There's no way out of it. So the Union passes a similar law in 1863. And of course, we see that there's a lot of opposition to the draft, as not everyone wanted to serve in this war. The opposition to the draft, there's a couple ways to get out of it. In the North, if you were rich, you could actually hire a substitute in the draft. Oftentimes would be, unfortunately, African Americans. In the South, a person who owned 20 slaves didn't have to go to war just because they were seen as an integral part of the economy. And of course, poor people are going to protest because they can't afford a substitute and they don't have 20 slaves, so they're going to be the ones fighting this war. Crazy, right? Now, Copperheads are going to be a nickname for Northerners who oppose the war. Yes, there are Northerners who oppose the war because they understood the Southern point of view, unfortunately. Obviously, we know that the Southern point of view today is absolutely atrocious and horrible, but again, back then there were Northerners that definitely sympathized with the South. Now, many times Copperheads are going to be arrested and held without trial. Again, they're going to be discriminated against big time. So as we start to near the end of the war, we start to see a couple different things occur. First, Northerners who supported the war wanted slavery to end. They figured this was just going to happen, and they were waiting for Lincoln to do something about it. But he hasn't yet. And Lincoln was really waiting for a big victory. And that victory comes at Antietam. That's for sure. As again, we're going to see the Emancipation Proclamation be proclaimed after that. So at first, Lincoln wanted to just save the Union, not get rid of slavery. He didn't want to touch that. He just wanted to bring back the South to the North. But it was much bigger than that. And Lincoln grew. Again, he really did grow. And it's an amazing thing to see him grow. Because what happens is he does pass the Emancipation Proclamation. He was losing support. Again, the war wasn't going well, like we talked about. There were many defeats that the North had. And again, the South looked like they had this. So he technically doesn't have the constitutional authority to end slavery. That would have to be done through an amendment. And then amendments have to, you can't just have a president make an amendment. So in September of 1862, he says that all slaves in areas rebelling against the U.S. would be free on January 1st, 1863. You are going to take a look at the actual Emancipation Proclamation. It's very short, but essentially he waited till after Antietam to go ahead and free the slaves. But notice something. It says rebelling against the U.S. So what states are those? It's the Confederacy. It's only going to affect the Confederacy. It's not going to affect the border states. States like Maryland that, again, still had slavery, were part of the Union, but he didn't want to lose them. Again, he didn't want to lose them, so he doesn't free the slaves there right away. Now, on January 1st, 1863, this did not free any slaves because the South didn't listen. Why would they? The states rebelling against the U.S., it's the Confederacy, why would they get rid of their slaves? Again, they were their own country. So they don't listen to this. This really gets into effect when those states start to come back to the U.S. Then they are going to have to follow it, and it really is just a precursor to the 13th Amendment, which we'll be going over shortly in our next unit. So this really is, like I said, preliminary to all this, is 3 years before the states officially end slavery, all the states, but with the amendment. I can't show you that. So the effects of the proclamation are pretty simple. At first, it doesn't do, that day of January 1st, 1863, it didn't free any slaves. But it's going to do a lot later. Again, as the Union troops move in, slaves are going to run away, and over 500,000 slaves are going to leave their masters when the Union troops are near. And when they do that, then it definitely becomes an incredible proclamation for sure. African Americans are going to enlist, and of course, we have over 180,000 African Americans that are actually going to serve for the Union Army during this time, 20 of which are going to win the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is incredible. That's the best honor you can get in our military. So this is starting to turn into the war of attrition, meaning each side is literally trying to wear down each other. They're trying to wear them down until there's no more resources left. Grant is going to march into the South and continue to push his way further into their territory. And he's going to lose many men. He's going to continue to fight. And eventually Lee is going to be forced to surrender. Now, arguably, Grant and Lee are going to be, Ulysses S. Grant is going to be the Union General, the lead Union General here, the Army of the Potomac, against Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. And what we see here is a battle of wits. Definitely, I don't want to be biased or anything, but definitely Lee was an incredible leader. He really was. Just fought on the wrong side, man. And Grant definitely had a different type of military strategy for sure. And what we see is the battle of those two guys. But they're not the only two major, generals going at it at this point. We're going to have General William Tecumseh Sherman, who's got a screw or two loose, going to do his march to the sea. And again, he's going to be going against Joe Johnson, who's going to be another Confederate general. In fact, he was the lead Confederate general before he got injured, and Lee took over. then they saw Lee was like doing amazing, so they just gave Joe Johnson another section of the army there. Go fight over there, Joe. Fighting Joe. So General Sherman moves 100,000 men from Tennessee to Georgia. And when he gets to Georgia, he goes to Atlanta and he burns that to the ground. I've literally been to the spot where his men started the fire. There's a plaque there. And he burns Atlanta to the ground. Then he does something called, what we see really one of the first times here in America, something called total war, which means he destroys everything from Atlanta to Savannah. However, he does not destroy Savannah. Savannah's beautiful. It really is. You should go there sometime. It's amazing. It's absolutely beautiful. The squares. Oh, it's so good. But he does not burn Savannah. He does burn everything from Atlanta to Savannah. Again, everything from military to civilian property as well. He goes from the north, says the Southerners want a war, let's bring it right to them, goes right to the deep south, and creates a lot of carnage. Now, he does telegraph the president and tell him Atlanta's burning. In fact, he said, "Merry Christmas, Atlanta's burning," because that's just kind of the humor Sherman had. So when I say he's destroying everything, him and his men are literally destroying everything. Again, as you can see, William Tecumseh Sherman right here. But it all comes to the end in a town called Appomattox Courthouse. Now, this is like, I'm just going to be real with you on this one. Appomattox Courthouse. If courthouse is 2 words, that's a township, like a small village, like a small town. If it's 1 word, then it's a courthouse. So Appomattox Courthouse is the name of the township that the actual surrender occurred in. I've been there. These are pictures from when I was there. The actual surrender doesn't happen in, not to be confused, the courthouse that is located in Appomattox Courthouse. But it does actually happen in a civilian house, which is called the McLean House. It's ironic because him and his family actually were in Northern Virginia. They left in 1862 to get away from the war, and yet the war literally ends right there in his living room. So that must have been kind of interesting, yeah? So Grant and Lee meet in Appomattox Courthouse, again the township, on April 9th, 1865. Lee puts on a brand new uniform that had come in, and he's noted to have said that by the end of this day I will be Grant's prisoner. Lincoln did telegraph to Grant prior to and said be easy on him. Remember? I mean, Robert E. Lee was good friends with Lincoln. And Lee marched with not only an incredible line of Union troops on either side of the road, but it's gonna march right up into the McLean House and sign the surrender. Very famously, there is a Native American there that literally says that we're all Americans when Lee makes a little bit of a remark there. Check the Surprise Soldiers video for what that is. A little clip. They were allowed to not only have the South to keep their sidearms, but their horses as well. As Lee leaves the McLean House, he is saluted. He is cheered by the Union troops as he was a well-respected man. And the Southern troops were literally told to go home. They gave him a little slip of paper, essentially, that was printed there at Appomattox Courthouse. That goes ahead and says, hey, if you run into any Union patrols, just show them this. Tell them, hey, war's over, guys. I'm good. And 3 weeks later, Joe Johnson surrenders to Sherman, ending this war. So what are the consequences of this war? There are a lot. It's the deadliest American war. Now, the reason why, it was Americans versus Americans, but still, it was very deadly and a bloody war. The Southern economy is devastated. Again, not only just because of some of the stuff that Sherman was doing, for example, but also because fighting a war is very expensive. And slavery had ended. Slavery's going to end. Now, when slavery ends, and this is really leading into our next unit, it's going to leave 4 million former slaves without a home or without a job. Essentially homeless, never been able to read or write in most cases, and they're going to be left to fend for themselves. We're going to see that this is going to be a trying time for African Americans throughout the nation, and we're going to be getting into that with our next unit, Reconstruction after the Civil War. Okay, so here's just some of the Civil War battles to show you where the majority of it all happened. Glorietta Pass, that was in that surprise Soldiers of the Civil War video there, where you had New Mexico, probably the most farthest west that this war even actually occurs, which is pretty amazing. But yeah. So, by the numbers, the Civil War is pretty insane. We know it's 391 suicides from the Union Army, Combined casualties of the bloodiest day, which is Antietam, is 23,000. We have over 51,000 3 days of Gettysburg for casualties as well. And the total casualties over 4 years are 630,000 people. It's insane. That's missing, wounded, killed. Okay, and we compare it to other wars that we've been in, and the Civil War is the largest. Again, it's Americans versus Americans, but it is interesting to see just how much of a toll that this war really had on this country. All right, so that's it. Again, I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you back in class.